Kia ora, and welcome to another episode of DisruptEDTV. This morning we are joined by the fabulous Cheryl Doig. Cheryl Doig is a futurist. We fondly refer to her as our futures auntie. She is from Think Beyond. She's also a lifetime educator. She's been a teacher. She's been a school leader, a principal, and now balances her time working with both educators and people from across different sectors as a futurist, as someone that is passionate about us thinking big and thinking long term about how we can lead sustainable change within our environments, whether it be a school environment or within a business environment. So welcome, Cheryl. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for inviting me to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. One of the things that I'm really keen to explore in the conversation today, and it's a bit of a conversation we had before recording this session, is this concept of what you referred to as used futures. So we know we are going through a really tricky time in education. We've got a new government in place. We've got potentially new initiatives being introduced. We're also responding to really complex classroom and school environments with young people who have come out of a pandemic, and a whole lot of adults that have come out of a pandemic and are sometimes struggling to be engaged in learning in the same way they might have been in the past. And what we're also seeing at this point in time is suggestions for what feel like strategies and simple solutions that have come from the past or come from different contexts. And I know when I talked about this with you, you introduced me to this idea of used futures and the risk that we run when we look to existing strategies and inventions. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm really passionate about the used future. So when we talk about the used future, we're asking you to think about things that were really important and worked really well in their day, but have passed their use by date, but we keep using them. And often it's because we have a vested interest, especially if we're the dominant culture, or because it was so lovely when we grew up and were educated. And so we cherish that whole past and don't want it to let it go. So there is a sense of loss. But Youth Future says, let's confront the things that were once really important, are now business as usual, but should be hospiced into a new place and something new to emerge.
So I recognise, as both a teacher and a school leader, it can sometimes feel really tricky when we're faced with a challenge and we're recognising that, say, students aren't attending in the way that they might have, or they're not engaged in their learning, or they're coming to us at a different level of being numerate or literate than we've experienced in the past. Our instinct is to, as you say, go back to some of those strategies and those ideas in the past that might have worked for us. But we've also got the expectation that what we are going to do and what strategies that we introduce, particularly as a school leader, that it is evidence-based. And sometimes that can really hamstring us because the only evidence we have is for stuff that's happened in the past. We don't have a lot of evidence for those new ideas and fresh ideas and different ways of doing things. How do you suggest we struggle that? How do we juggle those two things as a teacher or as a school leader?
Well, I think one of the things is we could spend all our time in business today and there's plenty to do. And so often leaders say, I haven't got time to be thinking about the future or the big picture. We've got all of these requests and requirements. And so in the future space, we talk about walking on 2 feet. So of course you need to keep the structures and systems in place and be working in that space. It's an end. We need to be working in the future and setting up for future generations. And there's a whole lot of research and global projects and the idea of generational fairness for future generations. So on one hand, this future informed practice is great. It can be an excuse for just driving your agenda forward. So often in futures, that's the forecasting space. use data, we extrapolate, we look for what we might find out from that and move it forward. That's what a lot of boards want. That's what the ministry often want. They want you to show that it works. But in the future space, in the foresight space, it's a new place. There isn't. It's not historical. It's the next steps, and so you have to also be willing to give things a try, and to do that smart. I'd love to think that there's some transformations that would happen, and they'd be huge. But the reality is, from a change process, that's unlikely to happen. And so it may be setting up an innovation hub that tries something, or working with a small group of people who are drawn to the idea and moving it from there. And the language that we use in schools is really, really important, that be positive language of what might be and what's possible, without being flaky. So it's a walking on 2 feet. If I just spent my life in evidence-informed practice, then
nothing would change.
Nothing. Our education system will just go round and round. Or to be provocative, there are lots of things that come in and out of education. At the moment, we've got things like structured literacy. So everyone goes onto one thing as if that's going to be the magic bullet, and that it doesn't happen like that. So there are always unintended consequences for every action we take as leaders.
I think as well, it gives us a sense of maybe greater agency as educators in the face of what feels like on the surface some quite backward-looking initiatives that might be being introduced and may well be introduced. We're in a time where people are feeling uncertain, people are wanting to be feeling like we're doing something as educators, so we're going to become more rigorous, and we're going to assess kids more, and we're going to have more, structured literacy. We're going to make sure that there's an hour of reading, writing, and mathematics. We're going to make sure, like we might see, like I wouldn't be surprised in the current context if we didn't see a move towards a more structured syllabus creep up through the year levels, because there's no learning left to chance sort of narrative that's going on. And I think rather than saying, oh my God, there's no place for me in an education system which is so backwards looking, I think if we think about your 2 feet idea, we can say, hey, I can do that, but I can also do this. So I can actually work with some of these basic expectations, but it's not going to prevent me thinking of different ways to make my classroom relevant and engaging and meeting learners where they're at. What would your advice be for educators? Because my biggest worry is that we all go, oh my goodness, it's going back. It feels like we're looking to a UK system. I don't understand why we're doing this. Rather than losing hope, I think I'd like to think that we could take whatever is thrown at us, but don't let it prevent us innovating as well.
Yeah. I think with changes, historically, what I've seen happen is that some schools have a strong sense of what's really important for the future of their ākonga and rangatahi. Mm-hmm. And so they say, well, we need to do this, but you know what? We've got this bigger thing we believe in. And so we'll do that and meet the requirements, but we'll do it in the structure of what we believe about learning. And there are others who say, oh, now we have to change to be much more structured. And that's because they don't have a clear vision for what learning it should be like for learning for learners in the future. And so a clear vision is a critical part of being able to walk on 2 feet. I think having, obviously I'm a futurist, so I'm going to say that all leaders should have some futures training and background, because this is about thinking about future generations, not just those ones that are here this year or next year. And so there's this long-term thinking that needs to be done. But one of the things I think educators are really good at is saying that they are the problem. So we've got a change in government, whether you like it or not. That's what
it's going to be forever, isn't it? We're likely to be victims of the table, the tennis court forever.
And globally, we have got 74 elections within the next year. We are in a space of geopolitical turmoil. So this is not just New Zealand; it's us in the whole world structure. And so there is a move in this direction globally, and it swings, and so it will come back and forth as has been shown in the past. But this is what we have, and so as soon as we say they are the problem, that puts us in the defensive mode of we can't do anything about it. And actually we can, because you have big systems change, and you have the rise of the citizen. And so I'm really interested in the rise of the citizen, because the language we use creates hope, and the visions for the future, that whole the work on an image for the future and moving towards it, that is the critical work. Because you might not like what the government is pushing and think that they're going backwards, but that very language means that you have a particular worldview about they're the problem and we can't do anything about it. So this is the structure that we're working with. This is where we are heading from a futures perspective and moving towards that. One of my favourite tools in the futures kete is called a futures triangle. And it looks at what are the weights of the past, the pushes of the present, and the pulls of the future. And just the whole sitting down and creating that visual really helps you to work towards that pull of the future. But at the same time, you've got to recognise the things, the structures that we have to live with that are historical, and some of those are good and some we might not like so much. And the pushes of the present, that's the reality. But then you work out what you want to change the most, and you back map and do it smartly. And I like to use the term accept the nudge. Just do something small, try it, and keep moving forward towards the pull of the future.
I know. We've got used to considering whatever's happening at a national space as our enabling constraints. They are what they are.
Yeah.
And we've got the space within it. And we still have, and I believe we will continue to have, a whole lot of creative freedoms within the space of our classroom, regardless of what's going on, and more so than a lot of other countries. And I think we've got to remember to stay positive in that space. And I've also really enjoyed the fact that I've gone on a real arc. I've gone through a period of being loud and stroppy and frustrated with national, and I don't mean national as a national party. I mean national initiatives that have gone over the last few years and stropped about them and all the rest of it. And I've now actually hit a point where I've gone, actually, you know what? It is what it is. The best thing I can do is we're sitting down as a team at the moment and designing what we're calling our the Albany Senior High School PO for Powerful Learning, which is to try and unpack on a A3 page, what is it that must underpin all of our teaching and learning for it to make sure that whatever we're doing is as future-proofed as it can be. So, that starts with everything being utility-led. And then we talk about universal design for learning and developing learner agency and meaningfully engaging with data to inform everything that we do. So I think there's a job for us to actually see this as a fertile ground and a fertile opportunity to come back and say, hang on a minute, what is it, as you say, what is it that we really value, and what is it that we're going to do regardless, and prioritize regardless.
Yeah.
So you talked about that triangle. What's some other hot tips so I'm teacher Joe, or school leader Bob, and I think actually I need to upskill. I want to become more literate in terms of futures thinking. Where do I start?
Two places. One is big piece of work in here, understanding that the change starts with me. So a futures mindset has to be grown. It's like any muscle. And so it's reading, going on to LinkedIn, looking for people that are in the future space, following me and seeing who I follow, those sorts of things that are critical. And I think the important part of the assumptions and worldviews that we hold help and hinder us in our own futures thinking. So this is a personal adventure into to futures thinking, and there are courses, there are programs that you can do, there are things that you can do with your children, but that futures mindset, unless a teacher changes towards a futures bias, then nothing much changes. You can do a course, you can do some reading. I'd encourage you to do some resistance reading, find out people who have a different opinion from you, and actively think
resistance reading. I love that too.
Yeah, well, so why does that make me feel so uncomfortable? Why do I want to give them a poke and a prod? And so ask really challenging questions of each other. So some businesses have scanning clubs where they come together and they share ideas that they've found out there that are quite weird and wacky, because they're often the ones that just have a kernel of change. So look to the fringes rather than just schools that are doing school things.
Yeah.
And ask some really hard questions about what the used future might be. So here's an example. Is the used future a maths teacher has to be a human? Does a teacher with a used future, a teacher works 5 days a week? Those are parts of the used future. And when you look at other industries, that's a really important thing to just see what's out there. We know, for example, not just maths teachers, but maths teachers are hard to find, as are some other spaces. And
timetable constructs. I always find it really interesting in secondary schools that we really can't move beyond this idea that you could deliver an education that wasn't sliced and diced in some way.
Absolutely, and that's used future. But if you keep then trying to do the same thing, so coming back to the maths teacher analogy, I need a maths teacher and can't find one that's other than just a warm body, and you advertise and you look for another school who you might be able to steal from them. That's just trying to do the same things, and it doesn't work. And so that's like, well, how might we use technology, or how might we do things differently, because that model doesn't work anymore. So really challenging your thinking, and also as a teacher or principal, being curious about what's happening in other industries. So when I go to the doctor now, it could be face-to-face if I'm really lucky. It could be a phone or a video consult. Well, why do we need schools in the current space? What does that look like if we're having that mix in an education environment? Because doctors, not too many years ago, would have been thinking that mix of alternatives was something really ludicrous. So it's like, challenge your own thinking, form a group of people with like minds to start those conversations and keep moving forward.
And can you share a little bit more about your learning and your journey of moving beyond education? Because I know that one of my biggest learnings has been to engage in other spaces as much as possible. And I've been very lucky because I've sort of had that digital connection. Used to go to NetHui, and we had Singularity U and serve on boards that are outside the education sphere. And unfortunately, I feel like there's a little bit of a lapse of those sort of networking and meetup. They're starting to resurface again now, and you do need to proactively go and look for them where you can hear from people in other sectors. What's your learning been, and what's your tips for people wanting to, because sometimes teachers hang out with teachers and they actually don't know where to start in terms of connecting with thinkers and, innovators beyond the education sphere.
They just need to think more holistically. And so it frustrates me when people just hang out in their industry, and there's a reason for that. Accountants hang out with accountants, and or that you go to your industry conferences and so on. But you get to a stage where you get really bored because you're just hearing the same messages and nothing changes. And so what I did was I've always been interested in innovation and change, and to go to conferences that were not for educators, and it was easy for me to do because most of that I funded myself. But explore new groups that you aren't connected with. So while I was still a principal, one of the groups I joined was to do with design thinking. I was really interested in that, and it was early days, and I joined a meetup group and went along to a meeting. Didn't know anyone. I walked into the room, and was one of the few women, and I probably increased the average age by quite a bit. So, I went from feeling really, really sort of uncomfortable and not knowing anyone to creating a project with a group from Jade and so on, who helped with the emerging stages of Hayata. And so you have to be able to step it into that uncomfortable zone. And like you, the idea of joining boards, the governance outside of your industry is a really important place to start, especially if you want to grow your leadership in new sort of areas. So for me, it's always been about networking and doing things differently. And so here in Christchurch, we've got a strong network of people in the futures space. We've actually created that. So there's a gap, and I just need to talk to people that will challenge my thinking. Then let's set up a group and make it happen.
So, because I know people can contact you at Think Beyond. I've got Kayla's on my radar to come and talk a bit about what BOMA offers. I know that they do a lot of like free sort of futures thinking sessions that you can sign up for, in different ones, and there's different groups, I'm sure, around. So if you're watching this and you know of some great groups or meetups that are happening, please make sure that you do share them. So in our last couple of minutes, I guess I want this to be something that's really positive for our teachers and our school leaders. So what next? What could they do after listening to this in terms of the first steps of becoming a school that's going to not just rely on used futures, that's going to think about sustainable sort of futures thinking led change within their school?
Couple of things. One is to explore what's happening with students, because students are the most powerful resource. So there's programs like Teach the Future that have got resources that are in the future space. I'd encourage them to do those sorts of things, and to set up a group, even if it's 2 people, 4 people from your own school or a local school, and meet up for coffee or a drink and really do some of those challenging conversations. So but rangatahi are that's where the energy comes from, and so tap into the spaces that they're involved with. So coming up here, there's a group of young people that are going to work together in the sustainability environmental space, and that's often a good place to get started, because all of our young people are interested in climate, they're anxious, they want to make a difference, etc. So maybe that's a good way to start the conversation.
Yeah, and I know we've got the fabulous future problem solvers that are really active in that space as well, and I know there's lots of similar initiatives going on, but it'd be great to I'll encourage people over on DisruptEd to share some of their experiences and some things that they're aware of as well.
Yeah, and I'd say future problem solvers is great, but it's often for one small group of people who are often handpicked, and I'm interested in equity and all our young people having access to a futures way of thinking. So that's the challenge.
And in terms of, and I'm just throwing a curveball at you, in terms of te tiriti and te tiriti-led futures thinking, where would you steer people for that, the best learning in that space? What's on your radar?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Tokona te Raki, the Māori Futures Collective, which comes from Ngāi Tahu. A lot of that team have futures training. They're doing a whole lot of great work. They've got a Ngāi Tahu 2050 strategy that has got future scenarios that they've developed with iwi. Magnificent space to start, and so you can find them on Tokona te Raki. There are papers to download, etc. That's a really good space. And then there are some people that work in the space. So Elle Archer, who I think is co-chair of the Māori Tech Association, she does a lot of work in rangatahi youth futures. She's done a lot of work up north in that sort of space. Magnificent understanding of obviously te tiriti, but also the importance of rangatahi being involved in the developing of this. So they're a couple of my prime places to go for information.
Awesome. So I'll link in your website below, and I'll grab those details from you as well, and we'll share those links as well. I just want to say thanks once again, Cheryl. We don't get to see each other face to face anywhere near enough, and I really do want to thank you for making time to have a chat today. I know this will be the first of many, and maybe, just maybe, it might be just the provocation we need to have a bit of a futures thinking subgroup in DisruptED as well. Be neat to kick off those conversations and maybe some meetups again in the future. So thank you. Any last words before we say farewell?
No, just be brave and give things a go. Look to the fringes and just don't take no for an answer.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's still with us. Hope you have a fabulous week. We look forward to seeing you again in the future. As always, if you would like to come and join the conversation here on DisruptEDTV, drop me a line, or if you want to suggest anyone we can have a chat with, please let me know. But until then, ka kite.